All right. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our workshop for the 2025 Recreational Trails Program. I am Crystal McKelvey. I'm the Chief Recreation Grants Manager here at the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. We are in the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. Just so you know, our Division of PRR, we do cover recreation grants, the federal programs, RTP, Land and Water Conservation Fund, American Battlefield Protection Program, and others. We also, within our division, cover the design and construction of state park facilities, and we also do the state park master planning. So Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. My name is Kelly Seaton. I'm a Recreation Grants Coordinator at DCR, working with Crystal in the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. I'm kind of handle the day-to-day administration of the Recreational Trails Program grants. So if after this webinar you choose to submit an application, you'll be primarily hearing from me when we go for evaluating those applications and hopefully moving forward and awarding a grant to your entity. So look forward to working with you all and getting into some specifics about the program today.
Thank you so much. All right, I am going to turn my camera off for the purposes of the meeting. And as I said, this webinar is being recorded and is being transcribed. So the video and PDF of the slides will be posted to our DCR RTP website. You can use the Q&A at the top of your screen. That's a box that will pop up. You can enter questions anytime. We will stop periodically to respond to those. At the very end of the webinar, we will activate the microphones for spoken questions. If you're in need of captions in the upper right of your screen, you can click More, Language and Speech, and Show Live Captions. All right, our agenda today is to go over the RTP program overview and the funding availability, talk about eligibility of applicants and types of projects, how to administer those projects, how to get your reimbursement for projects selected, what the application process is like for this grant round, and also the guidance around that. Okay. Overview of the Recreational Trails Program. The purpose of this program is to develop and maintain public recreational trails and trail-related facilities for both motorized and non-motorized use. This funding is from the federal U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. The RTP in Virginia has, since 1993, funded over 360 projects. Per the federal highway regulations, the funding available must be split among three different purposes. This is split 40, 30, 30%. So 40% must be used for diversified or multi-use. That means multiple uses such as hiking and biking, biking and equestrian, etc. It must allow for multiple types of users. Non-motorized means a single use. That would be hiking only or biking only, or for the purposes of water trails, that would be paddle only. Then we have the motorized component, which is 30% as well. And this could be for single or multiple motorized uses. You can think of four-wheel driving on perhaps mountainous areas. And then you can also think about motorized boat launches. That would count as well. You can have non-motorized uses, but the trails mostly have to be designed for motorized. Okay, 2025 funding and award amounts. There's approximately $1.7 million available from the apportionment and also a few underruns on projects that we had. So again, splitting that with the 40, 30, 30% equation for diversified multi-use, we have approximately $630,000 available, which we anticipate to award from 3 to 5 grants because the minimum request amount is $25,000 with a maximum ceiling of $250,000. Non-motorized single use, we have approximately $465,000 available in grant funds, which means probably 2 to 4 grants will be awarded with a minimum request again of $25,000 and a maximum award of $250,000. In motorized, we have the most money available at $690,000 available, and between 1 to 3 grants are anticipated. The minimum again is $25,000, and the maximum is all the way to the amount awarded. But if we do receive more than one application, we can split that up and divide that amount. Okay. Um, let's see. So the award basics. We receive these requests for applications. We do usually receive more. We have in recent history received many more applications than can actually be funded. They are quite competitive. So you can see in the past few years, it's between 23 to 36% of the applications are funded, while the rest remain not funded. So that's just an idea of how competitive it is and how you should really focus on having a strong application and making sure that your project is fitting the specifics of the program. The payments will be made on a reimbursement basis. This is a match reimbursement program, so you must be able to fund the project fully with periodic reimbursements. Um, so you also must account for the match percentage. In this program, it is a 20% minimum of total project cost or 25% of the grant amount. So for example, if you have a project total cost of 125,000, you would receive a $100,000 grant and would require ultimately a $25,000 match. Applicant eligibility. This again is federal funding. So for local governments, that can include cities, towns, and counties, state agencies. Within Virginia, this is typically DWR or DCR, and it could be others. Tribal governments, this would be state and federal recognized tribes. Federal government agencies, we have had the U.S. Forest Service, and there could be other examples. Public recreation government entities, that's usually park authorities, regional park authorities, and also public district commissions. And then nonprofit organizations. With these, they must have a letter of support from a local government body. You don't necessarily have to have an MOU, but you are more than likely going to be working with your locality on procurement, environmental review, and permitting. And we do want to know that the locality will not be opposing the project later and make sure that it aligns with the long-term plans of your area. All right. Going into the regs a little bit further, we're going to discuss the eligible match. So you do have to have match components to this, and we want you to know that you can be creative with what you will be using for your available funding. The cash is pretty straightforward. That would be straight funds that you have available. Force account labor equals your staff that are in-house that you're able to dedicate to the project. You do have to provide work logs of proof that it is specific to that project and also proof of salary rates. A lot of our projects use volunteer labor. You do need logs for that and signed logs, and use the government rate for that, which can add up pretty quickly. Also, you can have equipment use rates. We do use the federal rate for that equipment, so you do have to be very specific about what type of equipment, and again, use logs of how many hours, and then then there's a way to translate that and calculate the value of it. You can also keep a log of the equipment user and use their salary as well. It's just very key to know that you need to have a process in place at your locality or within your group to be able to track that very efficiently. You will have to provide those at time of request for match reimbursement. You can use other grants. The asterisk there is to make sure that there's no conflict with the other grant. We would like to see the other grant agreement, and we do want to know that you have spoken with the other grantors to confirm there's no conflict. It must still be able to, be for recreation and not have any issues. Especially with federal grants, it can be tricky to match federal to federal. So if you have any questions, do reach out to us on that. Donations can work as well, but we do have to see appropriate valuation documents for those items. In-kind labor, materials, and equipment, that's kind of a whole kind of a summary of what we said all above. So if you do have others in your community that want to provide their labor, or perhaps a contracting company that wants to, provide a couple days' work, if they can provide a letter and proof that they've done that and what that value is, that could also be used. This does have limitations, but we do allow in the regulations and we allow within our state manual that you can use your environmental review and design costs if they incurred within 18 months of the award date. So typically at this point, the awards would be coming in after September 30th, so you can calculate back. And if you have had the proper documentation, such as the invoice, the description of work specific to this trail project, you may be able to use that as match the costs already incurred. Ultimately, any of these items, especially in-kind volunteer labor, donations, and then your force account labor, you must outline that in your application and proposed budget so that they can be written into the grant agreement. We cannot add those items to your budget after they are authorized. Federal Highways Administration needs to know upfront that these items will be included in your project. All right. So for our schedule for the grant round, we opened the grant round March 11th after receiving state approval to do so. And the applications are due May 6th by 4 p.m. and they are due via email to the recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov email address. If you think your file will be too large, or if you want to test that the day before or something, you're welcome to do so. And you can reach out to us if you believe you'll have any issues with making that a PDF. Then May through June, we have an advisory committee. DCR will do a preliminary review to make sure the applications are complete and the projects are eligible, and send those to our advisory committee of trail specialists. And then in late June, we'll meet the committee to recommend the projects for funding. Those applicants that are recommended will then be contacted for us to do site inspections between July and August. And from those site inspections, we'll compile the necessary documents to prepare to send to the Federal Highways Administration. And then as long as things go through accordingly with them, then tentatively in September, we plan to release the project authorizations and grant agreements. For the grant agreements, basically, you are going to receive a sub-agreement to sign and then send that back to us. We will have our DCR director sign it and return that to you fully executed. And once you have that, then you can begin the work. All right. I think we'll pause there.
Yeah, so I'll in a minute get into some project eligibility things, but I did want to note on the schedule just to address the uncertainty around federal grants right now, and just share with you all that we did receive a notice of this year's available funds from the Federal Highway Administration in February, and we have not received any word on whether there would be any future changes to the RTP program. So we're moving forward with this grant round in that that's the guidance we've received, but just in light of the schedule, this is how we expect things to work in our schedule that we use most years, but know that there could be some variations to this, or perhaps additional steps or procedures that will have to be completed if it is determined that the program will undergo any changes going forward. All right, but now into specific eligibility on trail projects for this year. So since this is an odd year, beginning in 2023, we implemented where in odd years, only projects on existing trails are eligible for funding. And this is due to historically those types of projects did not compete well with new construction. However, they are, an absolutely very necessary part and type of project that needs to be funded, and RTP is one of the few fund sources that can fund those type of projects. So for this year, only projects that are on existing trails or benefit existing land and water trails will be accepted. We do expect to allow new trail construction next year, in all future even years. So what the project types that looks like. I know I have we have a lot of words listed on this screen here. That's because we know folks will be looking at the slides afterwards, so we kind of try to dump everything on there. But that can be, maintenance and rehab of the trails themselves. It does allow, or we are allowing some new construction if it's an amenity that supports an existing trail. So that could be things at a trailhead, even up to a new trailhead if the trail itself is already existing, or new construction of amenities or facilities that are along that existing trail. The real key is that the trail itself is existing and already in use. Specific features that increase access for people with disabilities to an existing trail. And then we have an asterisk on this next item, lease or purchase of trail maintenance equipment. And that is because there's a few additional requirements above the kind of standard grant requirements that that you would need if you are interested in purchasing equipment with this grant. And we'll get into it a little bit more later, but in short, you would have to do some ongoing reporting even after we close the grant out if you were to purchase equipment with the grant. And then the last items, because we require that something constructed be the end result, you can't have a project that is only these things, but if they're part of a project, you could acquire an easement or fee simple titled property. If, say, it is an existing trail, it's already open and there's an opportunity to acquire a parcel of that trail that perhaps the entity did not already own or did not have a full easement on yet. So we don't see that very often, but they are eligible expenses. And then same with assessing trail conditions for accessibility and or maintenance. You could do that if there's also a component of then making those repairs and making those improvements as part of the project. So you could assess a larger system and perhaps do the repairs on one subset of that, but you would need some part of the project to result in a constructed on the ground element. Some examples, which I guess we kind of already got into a little bit, but any type of treadway improvement can be your standard annual maintenance, like brushing the corridor or down and hazard tree removal. You can do those type of things up to full scale rehabilitation of the trails. Regrading or paving a trail repaving something that's already is paved, or paving a trail that currently is not a hardened surface yet, that would be eligible, as well as short reroutes. A major reroute that's taking you to a new feature, we would consider that more new trail construction, so it would be eligible next year, but something that is designed to address some type of issue that is happening on a small section of trail would be allowable. And then, as we've already discussed, new improvements at a trailhead or along a trail, things like parking or restrooms, signage would be eligible as well. Bridges, again, if they support an existing trail, you can both replace or even construct a new bridge as long as that is necessary as part of an existing trail, and then amenities along a land or water trail. And those can be, small items like benches, interpretive signage, or accessibility features like tactile models, and some safety things like wayfinding signage or lighting. And, we certainly encourage those can be components of larger projects as well. If you're looking to do a bigger project, we certainly encourage you to utilize this grant to add some of those additional features that you might not otherwise be able to do. And for boat launches, as Crystal mentioned at the beginning, we can do both paddle launches or motorized boat launches. We have funded a few of those in past years as a way to utilize our motorized funds, which historically is not a very competitive category for this program, and lease or purchase of equipment specifically for trail system maintenance. So we will evaluate the applications for an application in which you are seeking to purchase equipment. You'll be evaluated on what maintenance work you intend to do with that equipment as soon as you buy it. However, once that period, the grant period is over, you are able to use that equipment for other RTP eligible activities. So you could then build new trails with this equipment as well. It's just for this grant round, within the grant period, we would be evaluating you on what maintenance tasks you are looking to do with that equipment. So ineligible things, the first one, we get this question frequently, would be boat launches on lakes or waters without a water trail or blueway designation. So we are pretty flexible on how we define water trail. And that is if the waterway is identified in the Virginia Outdoors Plan mapper or identified as a scenic river, as a blueway, or in a local comprehensive plan. Really, if it's identified in a planning document as some type of water trail or blueway, we would accept that, but we cannot fund, because the focus of this program is the kind of point A to point B use of a trail system. We can't fund things that are on lakes that are really kind of from one point where you're going and exploring out from one kind of set start point. And so similarly to that is why fishing piers are not eligible either, because they're kind of, they're not focused on the A to B use of a waterway. They're focused on kind of one location. Any recreational facility that may be near a trail but doesn't directly support trail use, like playgrounds, campgrounds, if they're accessed by vehicle, sporting fields, kind of park-like amenities, would not be eligible. And same with multi-use facilities that support uses beyond the trail. If it's kind of like a small little information kiosk or some type of entrance booth or something that is focused on the trail use, those things can be funded, but not anything that supports kind of the larger recreational uses for this program. And then the equipment has to be for trails, cannot be used for general grounds maintenance. So we would be requiring ongoing reporting about the equipment. So we'd be checking in on that and making sure the equipment is being used for the purposes of the program. I already mentioned that a longer reroute is probably not going to be eligible. There is kind of a line where we would cut that off. And similarly, a connector trail or extensions to an existing trail, we would consider that new trail construction, and it would be eligible next year and kind of compete better in that category. And then if something is not and has not been a public trail, it would not be eligible. So an example would be if you have a rail to trail, you're intending to create a new rail to trail corridor where the corridor is already existing and it may kind of look like a trail, but hasn't been a designated public trail yet. That's another thing that would be eligible next year in the new trail construction round, but not for this maintenance and amenity round. And back to our requirement to have a constructed element result out of this. While we can fund design and engineering, we cannot fund a project that is only design and engineering. So eligible costs, this is pretty similar to the slide Crystal covered with the eligible match items too. And that can be all the design, engineering, environmental review work. So this is one of a few grant programs that, can fully fund both the design and construction all within one project. So all of those things are eligible expenses. I encourage you to include those in your budget in your grant request. And that can include things that maybe unforeseen, like in the environmental review, possibly you may have to do a phase 1 archaeological survey, and those costs can be included in the grant if they arise. Grant administrative costs, within reason, we kind of have a limit on that amount, but you can put the cost for the extra work that your entity is going to have to do to complete the environmental review, the reporting, all of that for the grant. And then force account labor of your entity for project-related work, any contractor and consultants that you hire, of course, the materials for your construction, equipment with, the reporting limitations we've already discussed, and then amenities. And then just a few things that are ineligible. It would be indirect costs. So because of the limited amount of funding we have for this program, really, we can only fund direct costs for this trail improvement. We cannot fund general overhead for the organization or depreciation on your equipment or facilities. And then kind of also we can't fund broader things like feasibility studies because we need to end with resulted in the field constructed element. Food or gifts for volunteers or for workers not eligible per the program regulations. And same with per program regulations, we cannot fund rental equipment for trail users. We can only fund equipment for trail maintenance and construction. So kayaks or track chairs are not eligible currently. And then legal fees and late payment fees, possibly some legal fees associated with land acquisition, if that's part of the project, would be eligible, but generally most legal fees are not. And then anything that would be kind of the fault of the recipient, like late payment fees, would also not be eligible. All right, then I got one more slide and then we'll pause for some questions. And this, I just wanted to call attention to, we have a little more information in our grant manual this year about the minimum public access requirements for RTP funded projects. So the only piece of this that is new or that we haven't stated in the past would be this first part, that the expectation is that RTP funded projects remain open to the public for 10 years. Now, that does not necessarily mean that every component that is funded, you know, if a natural disaster or something happens, but the expectation is the trail on which these items are on is open to the public, and that will be in the grant agreement. Now, the next items, these have been in our manual, but I would say we probably haven't put an emphasis on them and have not always enforced them when there were unique situations. So going forward, the property itself must be either owned by a governmental entity, so that could be local, state, federal, or tribal governmental entity, and this is the property, not necessarily the applicant. Or if the property is privately owned, then it must already be protected by an easement or some other legally binding agreement at the time of application. So that was always in our manual, and it is a requirement in the RTP regulations. However, we perhaps did not always enforce that when applications came in years past. So the expectation is that it would be effective through the 3-year grant period, allow you to construct the grant, and then sometime during that grant period that would then be renewed so that it is effective for that 10-year period that it has to remain open to the public. And then, you know, may or may not be related, kind of depending on your situation, that if the applicant is not the same as the landowner, then we need that letter of support. Like if you're a nonprofit applicant working on public property, you would need a letter of support from that public landowner entity. And then if it's privately owned, then that would go back to above where you need to already have an easement or some other type of legally binding agreement. And we would accept that in lieu of the letter because we have a formal document as opposed to the letter. So we have more specifics on that in the manual, and kind of depending on the unique situation of your project, you can certainly reach out to us if you're unsure with, you know, kind of the mosaic of all these requirements, how it fits in and what exactly documentation we would need to show that. So before we go on, I will stop now. I know we've shared a lot of the nitty-gritty details so far about eligibility, and see if there's any questions. Crystal, do you want to look? I haven't even looked yet to see if any came in.
Yeah, there's nothing in the Q&A. You can also click raise hand. Nothing in the chat either.
Oh, wait. Okay, I'm seeing a few in Q&A. Maybe they only come to me.
Oh, wait, now I'm seeing them. I have to refresh. Okay. So I'll just read them from top to bottom. Our city received funding from RTP last year. Are we likely to be awarded funding 2 years in a row?
Yeah, I can take them if you want. So I guess, are you eligible? Yes. Likely is maybe. So we did have I will say we had an entity the last 2 years who has been awarded funding 2 years in a row. If you look at the scoring criteria, basically there's a one section in which you're awarded points that is based on how recently the entity was awarded funding. So if you currently have an open grant with us, you would get 0 points, and I think the maximum is 5 points if you've never had an RTP grant. So if in reviewing the scoring criteria and you think that it's a great application and does well everywhere else, I mean, 5 points may not be significant enough that would put you out of the running. So definitely possible. I'd say possible for really good projects.
Great. Thank you. The next one asks, want to clarify an eligibility question as a 501c3. Is a trail on private property that is open to the public eligible, or only specifically public trails maintained by a municipality eligible, for example?
So it would be eligible if there is a public access easement or some other legally binding public access agreement that allows the public to access that property. Uh,
For 10 years.
yes, for 10 years.
Thank you. Um, I'm typing the answers for others to read later.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I can see the next one then. I can read that
Okay.
one. Could you improve a trailhead parking area and also do trail maintenance on the current trail as one grant application? Absolutely. If you can do more than one thing with the amount you're requesting in the available maximum grant award amount, we absolutely can do more than one thing. It may make the environmental review component a little more complicated, in that you'll be evaluating the impacts for both of those pieces or all of the pieces. But you can certainly do that. And we have had projects in the past that have different components that it may make sense that you could also, advertise them, bid them out for construction separately. If that makes sense, we would just have to make sure we do one environmental analysis and environmental review for the full thing ahead of time.
Okay.
Those are all the questions I saw.
Yeah.
So we can go on to project administration.
Oh, am I seeing more? Yeah, there's some more up top. Can you give examples of previously funded projects in the motorized category? Largely in the past, these have actually been Southwest Regional Recreation Authority has openly received several of our grants in the past for their work in reclaimed coal field areas where they already had, gravel access roads, and now they've opened them for all-terrain vehicles, and that's really helping their economy. Kelly, the Forest Service, can you expound on that?
Yeah, so they've had in recent years a project to maintain existing off-highway vehicle ATV trail systems that have been, my understanding is they've been around for quite some time. So they're kind of doing routine maintenance that's maybe a little required, heavy equipment. And, they did bid it out for construction. So just kind of routine maintenance on their system.
And I can't remember the locality right now, I'm sorry, but we did do a motorized boat launch. That was probably about 6 or 5 years ago that it got finished. But yes, motorized boat launches are also eligible as well. Then I'm considering applying for Blueway non-motorized water access improvements. It's on 3 different sites on the same river, Blueway. One of the sites has a 99-year agreement/easement. 2 of the sites are on agreed upon VDOT right-of-way access. Is this acceptable?
Yes, likely it would be. We would want to see the right-of-way access agreement documentation to kind of review it, but likely it would be.
Yeah, I would suggest talking to us separately, perhaps after the webinar about that. Reach out and email us, please.
And then I see the next one is a restroom at a trailhead and eligible project. Yes, both, and that can include both the design and construction of that restroom.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. And we'll come back later. So if you want to keep typing, you can. All right. Awesome. Good questions. So project administration. In the following slides, we will cover the preliminary engineering phase, the environmental review requirements, and then on to the construction phase, the procurement for building your trail, the reimbursements periodically to get paid back for your work, and then how to close out your project. So the first step is project kickoff. We've talked about the application process and timeline. And I said that we would get to that committee, the RTP committee, and those that are selected for funding, the contact will be notified. So it's very important to make sure that your contact and your backup contact listed on the application are the people to be to reach out to for this work to set up a site inspection. And we'll also go over the project details in person to make sure that we understand that final scope of work statement. It's very important to have that scope of work be succinct, but also thorough about what will be accomplished, because that will be the agreed upon information for federal highways and DCR for what the project is in totality. So do not begin billable work, don't break ground, don't really get into hiring your consultant yet, or not your engineering group, until we have all fully executed the agreement, as I described before, with a sub-agreement to you. That comes back signed to us, and then DCR management signs it, and then you get it fully executed. That's when you can begin. So to describe that a little further, the grant phases. So the first, it's 2 phases. You have your preliminary engineering to get everything reviewed and set up, and then you have your construction. So this is federally funded. So it is a federal undertaking, which means that NEPA and Section 106 needs to be completed. So that's the National Environmental Protection Act, and Section 106 is the necessary items for historic review. So you also need to acquire your permits during preliminary engineering and complete those design plans. The overview and construction is that DCR will be reviewing the bid documents prior to you posting them, to make sure that you include the fact that this is a federal undertaking, and to ensure that there's a few other items that you're including in that, and that you are preparing to bid properly. So do not begin on the ground work until Federal Highways has approved that NEPA documentation. To get into some more detail about that, the process is to contact all state and federal agencies as pertinent with your full project details. That's that scope of work and those engineer designs for everybody to see the exact same thing. You save all of that correspondence that you sent to the agencies and what they responded with. Then there's a form that you will fill out with those responses, and you will attach PDFs of those correspondence. We have a whole document that is available on our website that gives you a step-by-step of who does need to be contacted. Most recreational trails program projects do qualify for a categorical exclusion, but basically you have to provide the proof from those agencies of them saying no impact or minimal or no adverse impact to prove that it's a categorical exclusion. So basically, the federal agencies to get correspondence from is the Fish and Wildlife Service through their IPAC, the Department of Historic Resources in Virginia, because that also counts as the state historic preservation office, the U.S. Army Corps. You may need a joint permit application or a different permit if you're impacting wetlands or waterways. And then there's multiple state agencies. Most relatable is the Department of Environmental Quality, DCR, and DWR. Again, we have a review guidance to look at. You also are required to have a public comment or input period of 30 days. And then all of this must be compiled to be reviewed and approved by the Federal Highways Administration prior to bidding for construction and prior to any on-the-ground work. We at DCR, we do our initial review of it, and we are the ones that recommend that document and move it forward for the Federal Highways Administration. Okay. So continuing with the preliminary engineering phase, make sure to include all of your preliminary engineering tasks in the scope of work and budget. Depending on the complexity of your project, means more complexity of your design. If you're doing bridge work and possibly in water work like those boat ramps, you may need more specific engineering and more detailed permits. So do stay mindful of this. I saw a pop-up question. Basically, you need to have an idea of what will be needed, but you don't need to have the permits and engineering done at time of application. This is items that will be done during your preliminary engineering phase of your project if selected. Again, your bid documents and your advertisement for bid must be submitted to us at DCR for us to administratively review prior to you posting. We do have requirements for Buy America, Build America, and other items that need to be in that, but we provide guidance in our manual. Once the preliminary engineering phase is done, i.e. basically that environmental review is signed by Federal Highways Administration and we have approved that your bid documents can move forward, your public comment period is complete, then you can move to construction phase. Any unspent preliminary engineering money can roll up into your construction. And then you must obtain your permits and make sure that you leave time for your closeout procedures within your grant period. It is every RTP project is first started as a 3-year period. It is possible to get amendments typically, if you need more time due to weather, due to unexpected events, but you do have to keep in communication with us. If you expect a delay, let us know promptly so that we can plan properly and let the Federal Highways Administration know, because there is documentation needed for any amendment. So I know that was a real breeze through of those phases, but I'll let Kelly cover procurement.
Okay, thanks, Crystal. So for procurement of an RTP funded project, there's kind of a few pieces. Primarily, the grant recipient would have to follow state public procurement procedures, and there's a few additional requirements because of it being federal funding. Now, if you're a federal entity applying, of course, you would have to comply with all of your standard federal policies that you already have in place. There's a specific little kind of paragraph that we'll include and we'll give you in your grant agreement that when you are advertising for construction or to hire a consultant or an engineer, that basically states that partial funding is provided by the RTP program and blah, 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 a few extra things. So we'll give that language to you and you'll have to include that in all of your solicitations. But the kind of main overarching things that apply to the project are there's a federal highways construction standard terms form or contract provisions form. I'm sorry, that FHWA 1273. So that's a document that you should incorporate either whole or by reference into your construction bid documents and your construction contracts. So we will provide that to you if you're awarded a grant. 2 CFR 200, those are the federal aid grant procurement requirements, or all the things that apply to federal grants, but there's a specific section on procurement that are applicable here, but they're kind of worded pretty generally that allow, in this case, DCR, the state, to then create its own procurement regulations. So here in Virginia, we have the Virginia Public Procurement Act, and that is primarily what you'll be following. So the key things with that to remember are that it would allow different alternative purchase procedures so you wouldn't have to bid something for construction if it's a small piece of your project. But those need to be adopted by the entity in writing prior to the solicitation. So that's the key there, that if you expect to have some small purchases and don't want to formally advertise them and collect bids for those small purchase procedures need to be in place in writing prior to that. And for nonprofit organizations, how we handle that for the Virginia RTP program is that the expectation is you could also follow the small purchase procedures of the locality in which you are located in, with the idea that those have been publicly vetted for businesses and so businesses and contractors in the area would have had the opportunity to put their input in those. So if the locality in which the nonprofit organization is in, say, has a small purchase procedure that allows you to obtain 3 quotes if the amount is under $10,000, the nonprofit organization could also follow those procedures and be in compliance with the competitive procurement requirements of this program. We have this all outlined in a procurement procedures document that we have available on our website, so you can get on there now and review the specifics of that. The of note is that previously RTP funded projects had to comply with Buy America requirements for domestic sourcing for iron, steel, and construction materials. Currently, there is a waiver that exempts grants that are under $500,000. So we expect that to be most of these RTP funded projects. Possibly in the motorized category, there could be a grant that's above that. So note that if you are interested in a motorized application for those higher dollar amounts, there will be a domestic sourcing requirement. And of course, we fully encourage and support domestic sourcing for all of your materials. However, the waiver allows us to proceed without requiring all of the extensive documentation to prove that they are domestically sourced. But however, if possible, of course, we fully encourage you to do that and utilize these grant funds for materials that were sourced in that way. There is also a requirement in the Virginia Public Procurement Act that you, when possible, solicit bids from small women and minority-owned businesses. So we have a little bit of guidance in that procurement document on how you can do that and how make sure that you spread the word when there is a potential opportunity that they could submit a bid for. And just of note, one exception to the competitive procurement requirements is that this is the RTP guidance language, qualified youth corps can be non-competitively hired. So if you are interested in having the work completed by a youth conservation corps or youth service corps, you can directly reach out to those groups, negotiate a price, and hire them non-competitively. All right, when it comes time to get reimbursement on your grant expenses, so just a few kind of overarching things is that we'll ask in your grant agreement that you submit them every 3 months just to keep the project active. And in Federal Highways terms, the project is active if we're processing payments on it. So especially in the early parts of the project, you might not have expenses yet. So we're a little flexible during the first year of the project, but we will be reaching out to you and asking you to submit something if we haven't heard from you in a while. When we get those in, we'll review them internally and then send them up to the Federal Highway Administration. So just that process of, going up the chain and back down the chain, it typically can take 4 to 8 weeks for you to receive the payment. Sometimes longer during periods that are like close to the end of the state fiscal year or the federal fiscal year. We kind of have some blackout periods. So we just ask you always let us know if there's ever more of an urgency on a payment, because sometimes things get kind of stuck in the process. And newer requirement is that if you are awarded the grant, your entity, if it's not already registered on sam.gov, the System for Award Management, you will have to register on that and obtain a unique entity identifier number that we include on all the grant agreements. All right, the documentation we need for reimbursements, mostly it's just documentation of the expense and then proof that you've already paid that expense. So typically that looks like a copy of the cleared check, or it could be a copy of your bank statement that shows those funds going out. And of course, you can redact all the things that are not relevant to the RTP grant. And then proof of the matching funds. So if you're not just using kind of cash match, as you submitted an invoice for $10,000 and you would be receiving $8,000 back, if you're using volunteer labor or anything like that, we have different templates and forms that you can use to show that matching fund proof. With each reimbursement that you submit, we have to have the corresponding amount of match that we submit each time. In the next slide, I'll show you what it looks like, where we store all the templates and forms. And then with each reimbursement, if we don't have a waiver for Buy America materials, then you also will need some documentation proving that the materials are domestically sourced. So we have all these forms on our website. So if you go to the RTP page of the DCR website, at the top, you'll see this year's grant round materials, the application, all of that. Down towards the bottom, we have some drop-down accordions there where all of these templates are available. So the procurement procedures document we referenced, the environmental review document we referenced, here's the quarterly report template. If you're awarded a grant, we'll ask for quarterly reports every 3 months. So those are all available there. And if we ever have updates, we just update those there. So you can always go on there and obtain the most recent version of any of our documents. All right, and then we got to the point of project closeout. So to close out the project, you'll let me know that you're complete, submit the final reimbursement. I'll come out and do a site inspection, and we require a final report that isn't, too lengthy, kind of photos. Let us know how the project went, what the outcomes were, everything like that, and then we can close out the project. So or summary, or maybe more in closing, there's some federal and state standards that you have to comply with that may be different than if you were to complete this project without this fund source. If any issues come up, we certainly, here we'll work with you. We want these projects to be successful, and we'll do everything we can to make that happen. But really, we just ask that you keep us informed. The more open communication we have, the more regularly you're checking in, the sooner we can address any issues, and the more likely that we are going to be able to amend the project or do whatever we need to make sure we're still able to move forward with something with the funding, even if we have to make some changes for things that weren't anticipated. So we'll stop here again for questions. I know Crystal's been answering a little bit in there. Crystal, Are there any questions you want to read out loud?
Yes, thank you. One that came in was, could a PDC apply to add ADA kayak launches to access water trails and improve/repair a boat ramp at Middle Peninsula Chesapeake Public Access Authority properties? So I do know that they have multiple launches. I said, well, at multiple sites, yes, but be mindful that the environmental review would likely have to be for each site. But in general, adding ADA access to kayak launches at water trails is eligible, and also public access authorities and PDCs are eligible entities.
Yeah, and I'll add that if the applicant is not the landowner, like in this case, you would need they're both public entities, and you would need a letter of support from that entity at the time of application to show that they're supportive of you doing this work.
Yeah, thank you. Would a statement in the organization's charter stating that it must remain open to the public count for eligibility? I said there should be a legally binding document specific to the land used for the trail, though the charter is helpful for the application process.
Yeah, I would say if we can make connections in which I don't know whether the charter is tied to a legal agreement where the land reverts to a locality, should the organization hold, if there's a chain we can make like that, then we would accept something like that. But as far as just the charter, likely that would not be accepted for the legally binding agreement right now.
Thank you. And then switching to the chat, because there are both. So there was a question of all of this would be after award of the project application. That was like the preliminary engineering and such. So I said that is correct. Then we just, so how long would you envision the process taking for a project which is currently been engineered and paid for with review by the DEB also, but not permitted yet and also not put out for bid yet? Could our part of the match have been those engineering costs paid for 2 to 3 years ago? All right, so the engineer design is already complete, will help speed up the preliminary engineering phase. So it's good if your project is beyond concept. If you're already like at that point, that's great. Your PE phase will just be shorter, but you still have to go through NEPA federal approval. And my understanding with DEB is that often you've met the state EIR, environmental impact review process, but that is not as stringent, or that is not inclusive enough to meet the NEPA requirements. So do be mindful of that. Just because it's state EIR doesn't mean it's NEPA. It means you have a lot of the documentation required, but you still need U.S. Army Corps and Fish and Wildlife Service, et cetera. So verify what correspondence you already have. And then I said only funds spent up to 18 months prior to award are eligible. So unfortunately, expenses of 2 to 3 years ago would not be eligible for match or reimbursement. And then we just got another one in the chat on public access. Would a road that is on state forest and is a state forest road that is open to the public for over 40 years qualify for public access, and a parking lot also exists?
I mean, if our requirement that the property be, protected by an easement or some other public access does not apply if it is already publicly owned. Like if a state agency already owns the property or a local government agency already owns the property, we do not require a public access easement.
Okay.
And then I see one more came in. Once awarded, do these funds have an expiration date? Do they need to be spent within the specific period? So when they're awarded, they will be awarded for a 3-year period. Like we discussed in the past, we've been able to extend those if they're not able to complete the project within that 3-year period. However, that is, absolutely not always guaranteed. So I would operate under the assumption that they need to be spent within that 3-year period.
Okay. That's all I'm seeing. Thank you.
All right. So now we can get into the grant application itself. So we'll kind of walk through the application files, give you some tips and guidance on how to fill out different questions for the remainder of the time we have. So for the application file, there's 2 files actually, when you get on our website and look at those. So there's a Microsoft Word document that's the main application with all the questions, and you fill in your narrative responses. And then there's also a PDF that's a certification form, and that's the form that we need a signature on. And we just keep those separate so in case you're scanning and need to obtain a wet signature, you can kind of keep that on that one form and then send in the Microsoft Word document that hopefully can stay a little cleaner, because if your entity is like ours, when we start scanning things, then things get grainy through the process and you can't extract the information quite as well if we're copying pasting it on the back end. We do ask that you create one final PDF of all your application files in the attachments and insert those attachments at the spaces indicated between each section. If you're not able to do that with the software you have, that is no problem. I can do it on my end. You can send them in whatever order you can, but it certainly helps us if you're able to do that. If you can do it ahead of time, then I can just reorder a few that come in if you're not able to do that. We don't have any maximum word counts, but we do have a few limitations in that we ask that you don't reduce your font size below 10-point font. Some of our reviewers do review these as, hard copy paper versions, so they wouldn't be able to zoom into those. So if you make it any smaller, they may not be able to see all the content there. And then we have a maximum page number of 30, which includes all your attachments. And 30 megabytes is our maximum file size. Likely on our end, if it's a little bigger, it would come through. I know some other organizations, and we get bounce back sometimes if we're sending things bigger than 30 megabytes. So that's why we set it there. If you're concerned about that, reach out to us ahead of, in advance of the deadline, and we can set up some alternative method, and I'll work with whatever works for you. If you have another file transfer system, we can use that. If we need to break it into 2 files and then you can send it to me and I'll recombine it on the back end, we can do that as well, as long as we can do all that in advance of the deadline. So if you're concerned about that, just reach out to me, at least a couple of days ahead of time, and we'll figure out a way that we can get that application in and submitted. If you have any issues with any of our documents, just reach out to us. I'm happy to provide an alternative format. If you need a plain text document or anything like that, we can find a way that works for you and with the software that you have. And we have a whole guidance appendix in our manual. So just, the end of the manual has some application guidance that's pretty similar to what I'll go through in the next few slides about walking through the application, but it has links to relevant sources that may help you complete the questions and just little explanations on some of the questions that might not be as straightforward. So that application certification form, that's the one that requires a signature, or a signature, sorry. And that the signatory authority is up to the applicant. So we don't have any set level that it needs to go to, but someone who at your entity has authority to sign off on a grant application. And for applicant name, that's where we're looking for the grant recipient. So this would be the organization that the actual grant agreement would be written to between DCR and that recipient. And then for contact person, this person is probably likely not the same as the signatory authority. This is where we ask for the person that can be our primary point of contact. So if I have any questions on the application, I can contact them. If they are, once we get to grant award, they would be the person who will be submitting the reimbursement request, the quarterly reports, kind of my main point of contact going forward. If that is more than one person, you can certainly write more than one person there and just kind of explain the relationship. But unless you tell us otherwise, that will be the person that we reach out to and would notify if the project is selected as well. We'll notify that contact person and assume that they will then distribute that information to everyone who needs it. All right, so now for the actual Microsoft Word application document, I'll walk through some of those questions there and just have some tips for some of those things. Section A is really all of the kind of background information, and you're not necessarily evaluated or scored on this by the review committee, but it is absolutely necessary information we need to be able to understand the project and where it's located at. Question number 2 for the project title, I would encourage you to do something that's kind of concise but descriptive. We don't need really lengthy titles. We have to use these on a lot of the reporting and documents and forms that we have to fill out. So something that's somewhat concise is always good there. And we always will be including the locality it's in that name too on our end. So you don't necessarily have to include that in your title. For project category, that's, as Crystal described, the diversified trail uses, non-motorized, single use, or motorized use category. If you're unsure, because sometimes, it can be a bit gray area of what's a non-motorized single use versus what's a diversified project, you can review our manual. There's more lengthy descriptions of those in there, but also you can reach out to us if you're unsure. And even if we get an application in and we think maybe based on your stated uses, you might not have checked the right box, we won't throw out the application or anything. We'll just move it into the box and evaluate them with the other ones that if it doesn't quite fit. All right, number 9, the scope statement. So for this, we're asking that you just fill out what the RTP grant funded scope and any corresponding match is. So if you're coming to RTP for either like gap funding or it's part of a much larger project, this isn't the space to explain all of that. That'll be later in the application when you can tell the story about how this fits in with larger, anything else that's going on. But here we really want kind of specifically what will the RTP program fund and what will you accomplish with these funds. And then this section has most of the attachments because, again, they're providing all of that background information for us. So that's location maps, a trail map that identifies where the project is actually located along the trail, especially if there's multiple locations or you're, repeating multiple amenities. Photos, which is super helpful, especially for these maintenance and amenity grant rounds for existing trail projects. Our review committee definitely likes having some good photos. We say 2 pages with the expectation that you can put multiple photos per page. If you don't have software that allows you to do that, you can submit them as individual pages and I can join them together, but if you're able to do that ahead of time, that really helps us and can save you some pages within the maximum page limit if you put them all on just a couple pages. And then as we already discussed, some of the different documentation we need to prove the right-of-way control, to prove the proof of public access. If you're a nonprofit applicant, support from the locality. We have all of those, the specific requirements outlined in the application and in the guidance document that you should be able to figure out, which combination of letters you may or may not need for your project. But if you're unsure, if it doesn't quite fit with how we've outlined it, just reach out and we can let you know, knowing that every project is a little unique and we might not have anticipated the specific circumstances around your project. All right, section B, project need. Question 15 and 16, I just wanted to note here that there's a lot of bulleted sub questions, and just make sure to address all of those as they're relevant to your project, as each of them may correspond to an item that our review committee is evaluating and scoring on. So be sure not to skip over any of those. Question 17, Virginia Outdoors Plan. We have links there that will go directly to the relevant sections of the recently published 2024 Virginia Outdoors Plan that you can review and then explain how the project meets those recommendations if that is applicable. For question 18 on local and regional plan alignment, just a note that you will receive more, there's only a couple points for this question, but you'll receive more points if the project more specifically addresses a need, it's in the local master plan to put a restroom at this trailhead. That would get all the points, versus maybe it's in the plan to maintain a system of attractive trails, which is more general. That would be maybe lesser points for that question. And then the only attachments for this section are documentation from those local or regional plans. And we ask that you highlight the relevant sections. Again, just noting that we're only scoring a few points for this, so we don't need a lot of pages here. We can just show the relevant plan, and you can include a link to the full document if it's available online, but do know that our review committee, as I said, some review them on paper form, so we're not necessarily looking at it, but it may, if one of the reviewers or myself, when we're looking at it, want it for more background information, we may look at it even though you're not really evaluated on it. All right, section C, public involvement and impact. So 19 to 22 questions. This is where you can discuss kind of how the project fits into the broader picture, broader community initiatives or involvement, whether there's volunteer involvement in the project, community support. So this is kind of where you can tell that bigger story with the project. Question 24 around accessibility. Just a note that we have some access for people with disabilities resources in Appendix B of the application manual. So I encourage you to look at some of those resources on making trail experiences more accessible for people with disabilities. We have no attachments in this section. All right, section D, this is design, sustainability, and environmental impact. Question 25, we ask what the level of completeness of your design is right now, and explain the level of design needed. So by this we mean, understanding that some, the types of maintenance projects we get, some may need very detailed designs, like you're constructing a whole new bridge and, has to have that level of design, versus the project may be to clear the corridor on 30 miles of trails. So that's not going to need the same level of design. So we just asked you to explain that. And then relatedly, question 26 about design standards, that's if, what standards are applicable to your project that you're going to be following. Those could be the ABA accessibility standards. If it's some type of shared use path, AASHTO standards, maybe you'll be following the Forest Service, some of their standard spec sheets for the work you're doing. And that helps our review committee understand within the scope of what you're doing, if everything kind of makes sense with what your plans are. Question 29 is around future maintenance. And just a note that the question asks for all of tasks, frequency, labor source, funding. And I just encourage you to address all of those items as they all correspond to something that the committee will be evaluating you on. The attachments for this section are up to 4 pages of construction or preliminary design plans. So there's not really much of a scoring preference on how complete you are in the design, but we But I would consider this item that it helps the committee understand your project. So even if you have no design plans yet, even a conceptual sketch of what you're looking to do will help the committee understand the project and what you're looking to do. So please include something there, even if you're not far along and it's more of like a napkin sketch, if that's all you have right now. All right, section E, last section, project implementation. So these are, the specific details of a schedule. So question 30, this is where we've had a version, this basically same version of this question in all of our applications for a lot of years. And I would say the number one omission we have is that we ask for a schedule, but we're asking for the schedule of how you will complete this project funded with RTP. So that includes probably includes additional steps and more time than if you were to complete this project outside of RTP. So please consider the different milestones and steps like the environmental review that Crystal outlined, like the inspection that has to happen, just to help our review committee kind of know that you understand what you're getting into when you accept these funds. And that's what we're looking for there. Question 31 is the budget. That, again, a typical thing that we maybe see not included in the applications is that we're asking for an itemized budget, but we also would like to understand, you provide a little bit of narrative on what went into creating the budget, where do you come up with these estimates, did you call around and get some quotes from folks, just based on similar projects you've done that costed this amount. Just give our committee a little bit of a background on where you source that budget information from. Question 32, the grant match. This is where we'd like you to list all of the things that you expect to use for match, whether they're secured already in the case of whether there are other grant agreements or donations, and then an estimated value for each of those. And this is actually a new thing that we have to start providing, and a specific estimated amount to the Federal Highway Administration when we'll go to authorize these projects for the different types and categories of match that you may have. So please be sure to include estimates for those. Question 33 and 34, around the procurement in Buy America, we ask a question, but really if you just outline what your procedure will be, you'll receive all the points for these items, and likely you'll be exempt from Buy America, but we are asking just, in case for some of those higher dollar motorized projects who may have to follow those procedures. Question 35, environmental review. This is an area I would say we typically, maybe some applicants have lost points in the past just because they may miss that even a maintenance-only project still must complete a full NEPA level environmental review. So there really aren't many points here. If you just outline what the steps that you're planning to do, you'll likely get all the points. But we're looking just to make sure another step that the review committee would like to know that you understand kind of what you're getting into, and that this may, hold up the project a little bit while you go through those procedures before you can go ahead and do the actual construction or repair. The attachments for this section would be a schedule if you didn't fit it in the box. So yeah, you can submit the schedule in whatever format works for you. If it's better to make it somewhere else or Excel or whatever, or make a nice graph, you can do that and do it as an attachment, or you can put it right in the box. A one-page budget, again, whatever format works best for you. And then proof of the match availability. So depending what your match is, if it is another grant award, we ask for one page of the grant agreement, and you can provide the rest of it to us if the project is selected to move forward. If someone's donating something, it may be a letter, or it may be something from the locality, perhaps the city budget manager outlining the budget that includes a line item for this project, anything like that, depending on what your match source is. All right, so now we got all the applications in, just a little bit about how this evaluation and scoring goes. I think we've already addressed most of this, but the scoring criteria are posted on the website with the other grant materials for this grant round. So please take a look at that as you prepare your application. You can get a sense of, whether you think the project will be competitive with what we're evaluating on. We kind of evaluate on a lot, a little bit of everything. So not just one type of project will always be funded or rise to the top. So you may do well in some sections and not well in other sections. And I encourage you to, look at that as you consider whether to apply or not. We'll review all those here and then pass them on to the review committee. Once the committee meets and recommends projects for funding, that's when I will reach out to those, excuse me, I reach out to all those folks and let you know. That'll probably be in late June, maybe early July. And then it'll be likely another month, probably like end of July, when I would reach out to the folks who are not recommended for funding. And the reason that we wait is because it has happened where in that first batch, for one reason or another, a project cannot move forward, and we're able to roll those funds to basically the next project on the list. So that's why we wait a little bit of time. So if you haven't heard from me, I mean, unfortunately, it does mean that you weren't in the top selected projects, but it doesn't mean that you're absolutely not selected or won't be funded, because we got to get through that process and the authorization process. So if you're not recommended for funding by our committee and we're not moving forward, when I let you know that, I will also extend an invite if you would like to meet, and I can go over all of the committee's scores on the project, their feedback, areas for improvement that hopefully, or, should you choose to apply again in the future for the same project, hopefully that would help you in preparing your application for future rounds. All right, so before I hand it off to Crystal to wrap up, we can stop one more time for some questions on all of that, and then we will hopefully get you all on your way.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, everybody, for staying online with all these details. We have had some more come into the chat and the questions. So I think that this question, in a case that a previous bridge had been torn down previously, be worth showing a picture of in the application? Yes, absolutely. Show pictures of what the issues are on the trail that you're trying to remediate. That is something that will be very helpful for the scoring committee. Another question, would the PE and CN, so the preliminary engineering and construction, all need to be completed within this 3-year period, or would a phase only need to be started perhaps? At the end of the project period for RTP, there must be a constructed element. So both phases need to be completed. So in other words, if your project is only in its conceptual phase and you don't think that you can get all that done, as Kelly said, we plan to keep offering this opportunity, maintenance every other year and new construction on the other years. So we'll still be here as far as we know. But yes, 3 years, you must be prepared to do so. Another one, if the design has been completed with 20 pages or more, what would you consider to be the most important 4 pages that you are limited on for the application? I said that you could put the full design on a website with a link if you want to. Our scoring committee, do follow those links sometimes. If they want to read more, you can always do that. Maybe the 4 pages I would focus on is an overview site map, the major components. You don't necessarily, I've seen engineer designs, and there's all the slope cuts and then the zoomed in items for the different components. Just select as wisely as you can so that we can get an overview of the project. Just want it to be clear that trail corridor brushing projects must have NEPA. You can share on this, Kelly, but I said yes, all RTP projects must prove NEPA. Like I said, most are categorical exclusions, so we're just kind of like ruling out that there are no issues. I do believe that, localities and agency, if they have the time, we're all strapped for time and overworked in many ways, but you go to Fish and Wildlife Service, you run their IPAC system, you go to the Department of Historic Resources, they have an online system. Basically, you submit your project, you wait for that. It often takes up to 30 days to get your response from them. But frequently, you'll get a canned response saying, we don't need to review this, just based on the scope of work alone or where you're working is already disturbed. So please do review the environmental review document. I know it feels like a lot of hoops to jump through, But then if you're getting funding for your project, then it's very well worth it. So do review that. Not every project has to have a consultant and spend a lot of money to meet the NEPA requirements.
Yeah, and I'll just add that depending if the project was on federal property, such as like on Forest Service land, the Federal Highway Administration has just basically adopted the categorical exclusion from the Forest Service that allows brushing tasks to happen, and they're already covered by a existing categorical exclusion. But we have to still submit that documentation of, here's the Forest Service's determination, this is the categorical exclusion, and then Federal Highways just signs off on that, but no new review work had to be completed. So if that applies to your project, likely we can move more quickly, and you're just making sure that you are able to work with, the district ranger or whoever is able to get you that documentation that shows the work is already covered by their categorical exclusion.
Great.
And that would apply for any project that's has another federal fund source on it. If the full project was already approved by another federal entity, up to this point, Federal Highways has just adopted the determination of that other entity for our projects.
And then in the chat, if you look at that, there's a question about combining federal funds. Doesn't specify, can you combine other federal grant funds on the project? I said it depends on the other funds, and the total federal funds can only be up to 95% of the total project cost in most circumstances. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so likely other federal fund sources can be used. The limitation would be if the applicant is a federal entity, then funds from that entity's department and the Department of Transportation can't exceed 95%. But, in the case of, I believe the person who asked this question is with a state agency, so likely you could use RTP and other federal funds as long as the other federal funds allow RTP to be their match or be part of the project. You could probably fully fund that. But if you are a federal entity applying, that's where that 95% thing comes into play. And if in doubt with multiple federal fund sources, we recommend just reach out to us with the specifics, and we can look into, on our end, whether there could be any issues. But RTP is pretty flexible compared to some other federal grant programs on what they allow as far as other federal sources as match.
Great. And then jumping over to the Q&A, this is related to the prior question to that. Our trail system is only 3 years old. Can we use our original NEPA review or start a brand new one? You did just discuss that with Federal Highways adopting CEs, but I asked who approved the NEPA because, different federal entities have slightly varying situations. And if it was a categorical exclusion, that's great. FHWA would probably request that document and just review it. If the footprint or scope of work has changed, that may need to be reviewed again. So it's not always all encompassing.
Yeah, and we may just need to redo small portions of it. Likely you may have to generate a new endangered species list, because since that information is always changing, we may do that, and it may end up that there's no different species identified, or maybe fewer species are identified. So we may do little pieces of it, but would not have to start over with everything.
All right, I'm not seeing anything else typed. Anybody want to come off mute? Thank you all for your very good questions in the chat and Q&A. All right, well, that brings us to the end. Thank you for hanging in there with us. As I said, in our team, we cover other federal recreation grants and participate in other programs. So the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we did get approval to open that up coming in June through August. So this is for acquisition and development of outdoor recreation sites and amenities. This is through the National Park Service. It's a 50-50 match reimbursement program, and you can learn more about that on our website. the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, ORLAP, is also through the NPS and a subset of the LWCF. This is for urban areas, but also for federally recognized tribes. So again, acquisition and development of outdoor recreation sites, amenities in underserved areas. This is a national competition. So it's kind of like a pre-application process, and that will also open in June, but close in July. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, we have over $7.2 million to obligate this year. Lastly, we do participate in the open space and parks portion of the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, the state VLCF program. So this is for open space and parklands, lands of historic cultural significance, farmlands, forests, and natural areas. We are waiting for that grant round to be announced, but expecting it this summer. Again, website link there. And then we sometimes hear about some different grant programs. This is actually through the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable. And so this is for Hurricane Helene rebuilding micro grants. So read more about that. It doesn't involve our office, but we did think that it would be important to share this. The applications are due April 2nd. So do read into this micro grant program if it could help your locality. That's what we have today, and feel free to reach out to us. We're very excited to have this open grant round and see what kind of projects we have out there. And thank you for your time. We're gonna end the recording, and you can email us. Thank you.